This is Mary Doria Russell, reading the prologue from The Sparrow. It was predictable, in hindsight. Everything about the history of the Society of Jesus bespoke deft and efficient action, exploration, and research. During what Europeans were pleased to call the Age of Discovery, Jesuit priests were never more than a year or two behind the men who made initial contact with previously unknown peoples. Indeed, Jesuits were often the vanguard of exploration. The United Nations required years to come to a decision that the Society of Jesus reached in 10 days. In New York, diplomats debated long and hard, with many recesses and tablings of the issue, whether and why human resources should be expended in an attempt to contact the world that would become known as Rachat, when there were so many pressing needs on Earth. In Rome, the questions were not whether or why, but how soon the mission could be attempted and whom to send. The Society asked leave of no temporal government. It acted on its own principles, with its own assets, on papal authority. The mission to Rachat was undertaken not so much secretly as privately, a fine distinction, but one that the Society felt no compulsion to explain or justify when the news broke several years later. The Jesuit scientists went to learn, not to proselytize. They went so that they might come to know and love God's other children. They went for the reason Jesuits have always gone to the farthest frontiers of human exploration. They went ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. They meant no harm. This is Mary Doria Russell reading the prologue from Doc. Playing for Time. He began to die when he was 21, but tuberculosis is slow and sly and subtle. The disease took 15 years to hollow out his lungs so completely they could no longer keep him alive. In all that time, he was allowed a single season of something like happiness. When he arrived in Dodge City in 1878, Dr. John Henry Holliday was a frail 26-year-old dentist who wanted nothing grander than to practice his profession in a prosperous Kansas cow town. Hope, cruelest of the evils that escaped Pandora's box, smiled on him gently all that summer. While he lived in Dodge, the quiet life he yearned for seemed to lie within his grasp. At 30, he would become famous for his part in the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. A year later, he would be infamous when he rode at Wyatt Earp's side to avenge the murder of Wyatt's younger brother, Morgan. To sell newspapers, the journalists of his day embellished slim fact with fat rumor and rank fiction. It was they who invented the iconic frontier gambler and gunman, Doc Holliday. Thin, mustachioed, a cold and casual killer, doomed and always dressed in black as though for his own funeral. That unwanted notoriety added misery to John Henry Holliday's final year, when illness and exile had made of him a lonely and destitute alcoholic, dying by awful inches and living off charity in a Colorado hotel. The wonder is how long and how well he fought that destiny. He was meant to die at birth, and fate pursued him from the day he first drew breath, howling for his delayed demise. This is Mary Doria Russell reading from Epitaph. Sing, goddess of ruinous wrath, the Iliad of Homer. To understand the gunfight in Tombstone, stop, now, and watch a clock for 30 seconds. Listen to it tick while you try to imagine 1/2 of a single minute so terrible it will pursue you all your life and far beyond the grave. Begin your half-minute with righteous confidence, though you stand 6 paces from armed and angry men. They have abused you. They have threatened your life. Your rage and fear are justified. They are in the wrong. You are within the law about all this. Have no doubt. 2 quiet clicks, a breathless instant. The gunfire becomes deafening, and when a sudden silence falls just 30 seconds later, the life you thought was yours will be over. Imagine. Your name is Earp or Holliday. Your name is Clanton or McLowry. Your name is Behan. Your name is Marcus or Sullivan, Houston or Haroni. You were in the middle of the gunfight. You watched it, stunned. You heard the fusillade and thought, "Dear God, not my man. Please, God, not mine." Whatever your name, it will be blackened. Every flaw, every mistake held up for scrutiny, condemnation, ridicule. Your secrets made public. Your reputation twisted and sere as a blighted leaf. Every accomplishment, every act of kindness or courage, forgotten. Everything you were, everything you hoped for, everything you planned, gone. Whether you live 5 minutes or another 50 years, those awful 30 seconds will become a private eclipse of the sun, darkening every moment left to you. You will be cursed with a kind of immortality. Year after year, everything that did or did not happen during those 30 seconds of confusion and noise, smoke and pain will be analyzed and described, distorted and disputed. A century will pass, decades more. Still the living will haunt the dead as that half-minute becomes entertainment for millions around the world. Long after you die, you will be judged by those who cannot imagine standing 6 paces from armed and angry men, not even for 30 seconds. This is Mary Doria Russell, reading from A Thread of Grace. Austria, 1907. This is what everyone would remember about his mother. Her home was immaculate. Even in a place where cleanliness was pursued with religious zeal, Clara's household was renowned for its faultless order. In Clara's mind, there was no gradation between purity and filth. She had sinned as a girl, made pregnant by her married uncle. Adultery stained her soul black, and God punished her as she deserved. Her sin child died. So did her aunt, and Clara became her uncle's second wife, dutifully raising her stepchildren, keeping them very clean and very quiet, so that her uncle-husband would not become angry and bring out his leather whip. Her husband was no more merciful than her God. Her second son died, and then her small daughter. Soon after she buried little Ida, Clara became pregnant again. Her 4th child was a sickly boy, whose weakness her uncle-husband despised. Clara was ashamed that her children had died. She hovered over that newborn baby anxiously, told him constantly that she loved and needed him, hoping that her neighbors would notice how well he was cared for, hoping that her uncle-husband would come to approve of her son, hoping that God would hear her pleas and let this child live. Her prayers, it seemed, were answered, but the neighbors were bemused by Clara's mothering. She nursed her little boy for 2 years. He'd squirm away and turn his face from her, but she'd push her nipple back into his mouth, regardless of what troubled him. She fed and fed and fed that child. Food was medicine. Food could ward off numberless, nameless, lurking diseases. "Eat," she'd plead. "Eat, or you'll get sick and die." It was immoderate, even in a village where mothers expected children to swallow whatever was put before them and to clean their plates. In adulthood, Clara's son would have nightmares about suffocation. He would suck on a finger in times of stress or stuff himself with chocolates. He was obsessed with his body's odors and became a vegetarian, convinced that this diet reduced his propensity to sweat excessively and improved the aroma of his intestinal gas. He discussed nutritional theories at length, but had a poor appetite. He could not watch others eat without trying to spoil their enjoyment. He'd call broth corpse tea, and once pointed out that a roast suckling pig looked just like a cooked baby. Whenever he looked in a mirror, he would see his mother's eyes, china blue and frightened of dirt, of her husband, of illness, and of God. Her son, too, was frightened of priests and hunters, of cigarette smokers and skiers, of liberals, journalists, germs, and dirt, of gypsies, judges, and Americans. He was frightened of being wrong, frightened of being weak, of being effeminate, frightened of poets and of Poles, and of academics and Jehovah's Witnesses, frightened of moonlight and horses, of snow and water and the dark, frightened of microbes and spirochetes, of feces, and of old men, and of the French. The very blood in his veins was a danger to him. There were birth defects and feeble-mindedness in his incestuous family. His father was a bastard, and Clara's son worried all his life that unsavory gossip about his ancestry would become public. He was frightened of sexual intercourse and never had children, afraid of tainted blood that would be revealed in them. He was terrified of cancer, which took his mother's life, and horrified that he had suckled at diseased breasts. How could anyone live with so much fear? His solution was to simplify. He sought and seized one all-encompassing explanation for the existence of sin and disease, for all his failures and disappointments. There was no weakness in his parents, his blood, his mind. He was faultless. Others were filth. He could not change his china blue eyes, but he could change the world they saw. He would identify the secret source of every evil and root it out, annihilating at a stroke all that threatened him. He would free Europe of pollution and defilement. Only health and confidence and purity and order would remain. Are such grim and comic facts significant or merely interesting? Here's another. The doctor who could not cure Clara Hitler's cancer was Jewish.